Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video with a story in which our OP used the most unusual method of arguing with his neighbors. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Feathered friends in high places. So for background, the day we moved into this apartment complex, our across-the-hall neighbor started bullying us. Why? We parked in the handicap spot next to the sidewalk to the building. Why? I'm handicapped. Turns out one of them liked to park one of his 6 project cars there illegally, and us using it for its intended purpose was inconvenient to him, so we'd get a bunch of nasty letters. Eventually, this escalated to them filing false noise complaints against us. We're very quiet, an introverted couple. We don't interact with people, we always wear headphones and do everything possible to cancel out any noise we make. We prefer to live in a way that most people don't know we're here. Okay, enough background. Our building has a decent-sized crow population. I've always liked them, so I decided to make friends. Spent some time doing research on them and their diets and went out and got some snacks that'd be nutritious for them. Every couple of days, I'd chop up some fruits and veggies and grains and take them out to their favorite tree in a little Tupperware box. I'd pick it up later and it'd be empty. It got to the point where they'd know what days I was coming and gather in the tree. As soon as I started walking over, they'd start calling out and more of them would show up. Our neighbors hated the crows. They were really mean to them, screaming, tossing things at them. In turn, the crows didn't like them. This came to a head shortly after I witnessed one of them back into our car and then take off at Mach 20. I was visibly frustrated and screaming at them as they drove off. Police didn't care, so that was a dead end. Or so I thought. A few days later, I overheard the neighbors arguing. Apparently, one of them wanted to set up cameras because someone was messing with his cars. He thought it was us, claiming that there were small dents, scratches, and chips in his windshields. Other neighbor didn't want to deal with it. We were curious, so we kept watch on the windows facing the walkway and parking lot. He did indeed set up small field cams facing both the walkway and his cars. It took a few weeks, but I finally saw what was happening. I'd go feed the crows, then for the days between feedings, these clever little guys would fly over the parking lot high enough to be out of view of the cams and drop small rocks on our neighbors' cars. My friends were getting back at him for me. They moved a couple years later. Crows kept it up the whole time while this dude slowly went insane trying to catch the vandals. And our second story. A dangerous game. I do have many stories peppered throughout my life that I want to share, but this was the first one that came to mind. This one has to do with my childhood and dealing with a psychotic aunt and uncle. When I was a child, I was often assaulted and bullied for being a mixed-blood kid, mulatto, by both my own family and kids in school. There were many things that my aunt and uncle did to me and got away with, which I would share the highlights of later. This story, however, is not one of those. My uncle was the alpha tormentor between the two. Both my aunt and uncle still lived with my grandparents, so there was no way to avoid them because I had to go to my grandparents' house after school while my dad was still at work. My uncle liked to play games with me in order to turn me into a fearless pet dog, as he put it, when I asked him one day why he was tormenting me so much. When he said that, the fact was he was being completely honest as well as smiling about it. I decided right then and there that this man was my enemy and I'd have to deal with him accordingly. If he wanted a pit dog, he was going to get one. After overcoming my shock of his honest answer, I said, "Fang you, uncle, just fang you." One of the games that he loved to play was chasing me down the road to my grandparents' house, which felt like an honest attempt to literally run me over. He'd always do this as I was walking home to my grandparents' house after school. Luckily, most times he ended up just chasing me off the road. The game started like this. He would stop his truck at the end of the road that my grandparents' place was on and rev the engine of his truck 3 times. That was the signal that the game was about to begin. After the 3rd rev, he would hit the gas and come screaming down the road towards me. I'd have to leap off the road to avoid being run over. After at least a couple of months of dealing with this, I had enough. I was tired of feeling afraid of walking down that street. I thought it over for a while before I decided I would get revenge. On the days I wasn't being chased, I started to count how many steps it took to get to an old stump on the side of the road that was hidden by briars. I'd walk backwards just so I could eye the distance between the end of that road and the stump so I would know when to run. 17 steps. It'd take 17 steps from the time he would start roaring down that road to me to get to that stump. The day finally came about a couple weeks later. When I heard his truck, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. As per normal, he revved his engine 3 times, then gunned it around the corner. I waited until he was close enough before I ran as fast as I could up the side of the road and behind the stump, throwing my backpack into the deer trail I could jump into in case my plan failed. Then quickly turned towards the stump and the oncoming truck bearing down on me. As expected, he followed me up the side of the road, too fixed on me to pay attention to where he was going. The next few moments were beautiful. The briars parted like the Red Sea, and to my delight, I saw his eyes go wide as he realized what he was about to smash into. He yanked the steering wheel to the left, his right front tire going over the stump, which launched him into the air. As he flew past me, I could see the look of terror in his face, and grinning madly, I began to shout insults at him as his truck nearly flipped in midair. Instead of flipping, the truck roughly came back down on 4 wheels, and he continued down the road to my grandparents' house and parked in the gravel driveway. I grabbed my backpack, ran up the trail, and hid. I didn't come out until after dark when my dad came to get me. I knew the sound of my dad's car, a Datsun B210, so when I heard him coming up the road, I immediately came out, waved him down, and quickly jumped into the passenger seat. My dad asked me, concerned as to why I was out there. At first, I just kept telling him over and over that we needed to just go straight home and under no circumstances go to my grandparents' house. When my dad kept asking why, I finally told him everything that happened. Without another word, he turned the car around, silently fuming, and drove us home. I don't know if my dad talked to my uncle after what happened, but what I do know is that game never happened again. That game, at least. And our next story. Score 1 for a bad A granny. An older woman in an HOA neighborhood painted her house a color. Let's say it was navy blue. She received a notice from the association stating it was not one of the 10 or so colors that were on the approved list, and she'd be fined if she didn't toe the line and get it repainted. She got a list of the colors, went shopping, and shortly after had each wall of her home painted a different color off the list. This was not a situation the HOA rules had provisions against. There was nothing the association could even do after the code was revised as she'd painted it before the change. Grandmothered into the old code. The HOA didn't F with her after that. And our last story. Begged me to come in on my first day of vacation and then threatened me with termination? As I was finishing up high school, I got my first job working at the Circle K down the street from my house. I still lived with my dad and had a pretty sweet deal because he was a consultant, thus his big house with a pool in a nice neighborhood was all mine about 3 weeks out of the month, sometimes as long as 6 weeks. My dad told me I had to start paying for my own insurance for my car and there'd be no allowance anymore, so I needed some sort of job. But I didn't need anything major, so I took the job under the premise that they just needed someone part-time. Immediately, I was thrust into 40-plus hours a week at this place as the manager had some weird inability to hire people. I honestly think he just lied about not being able to get people so he could run a skeleton crew to make his profit margins look better. I can't count how many times they had one person working a shift that needed at least 2 and could have used 3. The place was always a bit of a mess because, as mentioned, we were chronically understaffed. He was always asking us to do ridiculous amounts of work, and at one point even managed to piss off the beverage distributor so they no longer helped stock the coolers when our drink supplies came in. So sometimes you'd be in charge of stocking all the coolers, a huge order, while having to keep an eye on the register and all the other crap we had to do like facing the shelves, rotating the hot foods, etc. Long story short, what should have been a brainless crap job that did have crap pay, minimum wage, ended up sucking up huge portions of my time. But life could have been worse. I had a lot of extra money and a really nice house all to myself, so there were some social perks indeed. At a certain point, I requested some time off to go on a road trip with some friends, and it was granted. The day that we were supposed to be heading out on the road, I get a call from my boss begging me to cover. He acknowledges that it's supposed to be the beginning of my vacation, but he couldn't get anyone to cover. We probably didn't actually have anyone that could that day as we were so understaffed. Luckily for him, the driver on our road trip had let us know that we were going to be leaving later than originally planned. Pretty much exactly when I'd normally be getting off shift, so I agreed, thinking Mr. Bossman would owe me one. So I go in, and is there gratitude? Is there some beer with a bow on it waiting for me as a post-shift thank you? Nope. The dude gives me this ridiculous list of crap to do. There was always a lot of work to do there, but this was actually the most ridiculous amount he'd ever dumped on me. The icing on the cake was that he ended his whole spiel with, "And I need all this done tonight or don't bother showing back up." The CWAD actually had the nerve to threaten me after I came in on a day that I was supposed to be on vacation. So I waited for him to leave, enjoyed some hot dogs while reading a magazine, sold myself a ton of beer. I couldn't stoop to actually stealing, but I was under 21, so this was convenient. Then closed the place up about 2 hours early. I didn't want to leave right away because then someone might notify him, but this particular branch was dead after a certain time and no one would notice. Then I went on vacation, and seeing as how I hadn't done anything, let alone his laundry list of crap, I never went back. Despite the fact that I didn't do what he asked, he still expected me back, so I had the pleasure of listening to his 5 or 6 irate messages before he finally realized that it wasn't a misunderstanding about when I was supposed to return to work. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.